Hey, love, before we jump in, I want to make you aware that Tools of Transformation is open as of now, and it holds all the exercises that I wish I would have known when starting on my spiritual journey, even before, because would I have known how much it helps my daily life to reset my nervous system, to release stress, release anger, to energetically make conversations go my way before I even have them, or what mirror work can do, my life would have been shifted. So I really invite you to check that out. Link is in the captions below. And now we jump straight into the episode to have another wonderful conversation about how to get to this point of empowerment, how other women did it, what tools they used, what perspective shifts they found for themselves, how they navigated their life to come back to their empowerment. Enjoy the episode. Hello, beautiful souls. I am so excited to welcome you back after quite a bit of pause in the last weeks due to Easter. And I have the wonderful Kaitlin Henry with me today. I am so excited to have you here. Welcome, welcome dearly, Kaitlin. I am happy that we found the time together.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And as always, I would love for you to share a bit about you before we jump into our conversation so that people can kind of get a bit of a feeling on you, on your journey.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad to be here today. And I'm so glad we met. I love the world of social media and how we can connect from all over the world. So, I guess to start, I'm from Los Angeles, so a bit further and a bit different time zone than you. And I am a life coach and I have a podcast called Step Zero. It's really the step before step one. It's what I wish I had before I was ready to take step one. I talk about sober curiosity, spiritual and self development. And I'd love to just tell you a little bit about how I got here. Because it wasn't always what it looks like on social.
Yeah, I know that so well. Everything looks like so streamlined on the social after you kind of put it together in hindsight. Yeah,
Yes.
so please do. I would love to know more. And I love the idea of like the curiosity before like kind of saying yes and leaning into something that might feel so scary. And it could be sobriety or could be anything else. I think like the common point of before you hit the next kind of before you take the next step, it's like always so hard to do. So I love that you kind of weave in curiosity before committing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, growing up, it was like everybody drank the way that I drank. So, my parents introduced me to alcohol when I was only 9 years old. And they said, here's a glass of wine. They pushed, my dad pushed it at the dinner table and said, we do this as a family. If you ever want to try alcohol or have alcohol, you can have it with us. And what that did was that instilled a belief in me that everybody drinks this way and it's included in everything that you do. And in hindsight, now that I know what I know, it's not what everyone does and it's not included in everything, but that's what I grew up believing. And so it started me on this journey of using alcohol as a crutch. I coped with many things and we can deep dive later, but I have some childhood trauma stuff. I was an angsty teenager who was always really sensitive. I felt like a sensitive soul who was didn't feel like I fit in. And I used alcohol to fit in because eventually I got to middle school and other kids were using it, whether their parents agreed with it or not. We were all sneaking it and going into high school. It was very normalized to be binge drinking. And my dad even encouraged me to get a fake ID when I went off to college. And it was also, he said, I went to college in New York City and he said, you can experience it and everything that it has to offer if you have this fake ID. And in all reality, I sat in dark bars and I was at nightclubs sleeping in the morning and I wasn't experiencing the city. But at the time, everyone was doing it. Everyone was using alcohol the way I was. I didn't really think I had a problem, but I knew that there was something underneath the surface of like, I'm binge drinking all of the time. I can wake up, I can do my schoolwork, I can get what I need to get done. But there was something underneath the surface of like, this isn't really you. And there was like a yearning inside of me that I had something more to offer. but I kept using alcohol as a crutch and numbing whatever that was, whatever that intuitive voice was. It was being numbed. And so I continued the way I was going because I wasn't giving it enough breathing room to actually speak or to actually hear it. So I ended up graduating college. I moved from New York City to LA and eventually, got a handful of jobs. I kind of bare minimum it. I would have anxiety attacks here and there, but again, nothing everyone else wasn't doing. And then in LA, it was so normalized to drink the way I was drinking and to even include the party lifestyle of drugs and staying up all night. And again, since everyone else was doing it, I just felt normal, but also off. I had really bad hangovers and again, some anxiety. And I never was getting where I wanted to go. I had all these big dreams that I wanted to be like a Gabby Bernstein, or I would go to these conferences about spirituality and manifesting. And, I actually just went to Joe Dispenza. He was amazing. But all of these things, I was constantly yearning for this spirituality, but it was like I couldn't grasp it. It was always felt like it was within reach, but then alcohol was always the thing holding me back. But I didn't even see the connection at the time. And so eventually I had a couple jobs and then I met my soon to be husband. I met him through actually my dad. He was a mentor to him. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get married. I'm going to settle down and then I'll stop drinking so much. But what meeting someone who drank the way I did, it just fueled it. And we had lots of friends who drank the way we did. And we got married. A lot of our friends got married. We did the party wedding circuit for a year. I think we went to like 6, 7 weddings in a year and we were both in them. And all of these, it was just champagne and lots of drinks and no one was really getting into trouble. And we always made sure we had a DD or a safe way home. So we must be responsible. And so I got married and didn't slow down. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to have kids and then I'll slow down with my drinking. But what having kids for me did was I had this vision of what it would make me feel like, and that I knew I always wanted to be a mom. But once I had them, I was like, whoa, this is way more work than I thought it was. This is way more difficult. And I think I had a little bit of postpartum depression and I used alcohol. Once I was done, like I stayed sober in my pregnancy. I had sips of wine here and there, but I was like, I'm not an alcoholic because I can stop if I get pregnant. I can manage and control it. And so I had 3 kids in 4 years. I had them back to back to back. And I always say it was God's plan, not mine. It wasn't necessarily on purpose, but at the same time, every time I would get pregnant, I would stop drinking enough to say, I don't have a problem. It can't be alcohol that's making me miserable. It's my husband. It's the kids being, kids. It's life not working out the way that I want it to work out. And so every time I had a baby, I would start drinking heavily again. And I would always be getting away with it. And then I couldn't go out to bars as much anymore. So I would drink at home. I'd have a bottle of wine, go to bed, and I could still wake up in the morning. I could still care for my kids, but there was always that constant numb. It was like a haze that was over me at all times. And so finally, I had a moment when my youngest was almost 1. So the second one would be 2. And then the third was 4. And I ended up deciding I need to do a cleanse. It's a 3-day juice cleanse. I just need to rid my body of toxins. I was going to yoga again, hungover in a hot yoga room. But it's like I looked so normal from the outside that I was like, something's wrong. I need to just cleanse. So I went on this cleanse, and for day 1, I went to a professional baseball game and I wasn't drinking. And I realized in the moment, this was the first professional baseball game or professional game of my life that I hadn't drank at. And I noticed how much everyone else was drinking and how difficult it was for me not to drink. I had to sit on my hands. And I was the only one holding myself accountable to this. So in all reality, if I really wanted to drink, I could have. And I thought, well, I can control it. I'm not going to drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I can do this. But I didn't like the way it felt. I felt very antsy. And I thought, ooh, there's something deeper here. But I went home. I stayed sober for that one day. And again, I knew there was a time limit of just the 3 days. But I got home and I went down to the freezer to get the other juices. And I ended up slipping on my stairs and I just missed the step and I heard a snap in my foot. And the next day I went to an orthopedic surgeon and he said, you broke your foot. You're going to be in a boot and crutches for the next 2 weeks. It'll take 6 to 8 weeks to heal. And I thought, my God, I have a 4, 2, and 1 year old. How am I possibly going to be in a boot and on crutches? And I got home that night and I remember putting them to bed. I was scooting around everywhere, couldn't move. And I go upstairs and I thought, okay, just for these 2 weeks I'm on crutches, I've already done one night. I'm not going to drink because it's not safe for me to be around the kids and hobbling around. Like, I'm just not going to drink. And then I sat there and I was staring at my wine fridge and I thought, wait a minute. I really want a drink, but I just told myself that I'm not going to drink. No one was telling me not to. It was just me. But I thought, why can't I hold back? Why do I still want it? And so instead of popping open a bottle, I popped open my laptop and I Googled girl that feels like alcoholic but isn't one. And all of a sudden, all of this information came up, and I still get goosebumps to this day because it's just so true to my story. It's like, there was no way I was an alcoholic. That was everyone else in my life, not me. And all these websites popped up about sober curiosity, gray area drinker. And I started deep diving into podcasts, into books. They're now called Quit Lit, where it's like this quit literature on like This Naked Mind, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. And I was finding all these blogs and I thought, my gosh, there's a whole lot of people who feel like me and they all kind of look like me. And maybe there's something to this. I've never heard of this. What is this? And so for that week, I don't even think I made it 2 weeks, but for that week, I like deep dove. I did a whole lot of research and I thought, this is what's been missing. The thing that I've been using as my best friend, as this crutch, as this thing to numb me because I don't want to feel my feelings, is actually the thing holding me back from everything I've been wanting in my life. And it just was like this overwhelming feeling of finally, I don't feel so alien here. I figured out what it is that's quote unquote wrong with me. But now, how do I fix it? Because I was still craving alcohol. Your body is chemically addicted for like 90 days since your last drink. So to even stop for 90 days, I didn't know how to do it. So I started again taking these suggestions from these online blogs, taking other people's stories and running with those. And then I just did some research. I actually stopped, but then I didn't stop for good. I went on a girls' trip. I drank again. And then a month later, I ended up taking another solid break over the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And then finally, after this one last girls' trip where I didn't tell anyone I wasn't drinking, and someone pushed me a glass of champagne, and it was like off to the races. I drank like I did before the holidays. And I got home and I saw my kids, and they were so excited to see me. And they looked like they had so much joy on their faces and it was unaltered. There was no substance in them. They didn't need alcohol to make them feel any better or numb anything. And I thought, why and when did I need alcohol to stop feeling how I was born to feel, that joy that they feel? Like, why can't I feel that without alcohol? And that really was the end of it for me, and where I started this journey on just becoming sober curious turned sober. And that is a lot of what I'm just turned in my first draft of my manuscript for my book. And that's really the gist of it. And there's a lot more in there. There's a lot more deep dives. You know, in my marriage, I went through infidelity. I went through me getting sober. Then I go through my now ex-husband. He got sober while we were still married. And then we tried to make it work. And then, you know, now I'm divorced and now I'm living my life as an alcohol-free sober girl who's again started that podcast and become a life coach. And I really got everything I have today because of sobriety and because I just chose to remove that one substance from my life. Well, and all other substances. I don't do drugs, not even the natural ones either. Everything was cutting me off from my intuition. And now I feel like I can hear it so much more clearly. And I know what my path is today.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I have like full body chills over the last minute. I kind of trying to settle down. There are so many points I would love to touch on, so let's see if I remember all of them. But I think starting I would love to double down on this because I think it could be alcohol or anything else that kind of keeps us, as you so beautifully said, from our intuition, is each and every one of us has this one thing that we kind of put in between us and like the way our higher self sees us, or us and our intuition, or us and the connection to the universe, however you want to kind of phrase it. For me, it's coming back to the same essence. But there's like this little piece of paper that we put in between, and there's this downplaying that I think is really common for each of us in their own way. And it's not common to devalue it, but it's common in the sense that everyone has it in their own ways. And I think it's really fascinating that we do, because like you said, you looked into your kids' eyes and you've seen the joy and excitement and like all the beautiful feelings that we humans are able to feel. You have that in front of you, like threefold. And why are we like kind of consciously, unconsciously cutting ourselves off from that intensity of feeling to feel this like kind of fake want through a substance or through any like habit that turns into an addiction? I think it's really interesting. And for me, it comes down to us being afraid of our own power, or afraid of how we deal with that amount of emotions, that amount of energy. Basically, when we like come down to everything is energy. Maybe it's like if you give your kid a new iPhone and your kid is only a few years old, that's too much energy for them to hold. Maybe that's like how we are when we put something in between ourselves and our intuition. And I think your story just very beautifully laid out, at least in hindsight, these points of like here and here and here, there was kind of a sign, or here you had to stop. And it was like the universe was presenting to you like, hey, look, you can do it, and how much better you feel. But then again, there was a snapback, and it's very powerful the way you share it for the listeners, or soon the readers of your book. That's so exciting to see like, oh my God, where and how does this play out in my life? Because we all have it to an extent. And I think it's us deconditioning collectively at the moment, like really intensely, to come back home to ourselves and to really feel like, who am I? Which is what you said. And I would love for you to like go deeper on that. Giving up the alcohol, like in the end, didn't seem like it was the loss of something, but rather the finding like of something, the finding of like, or the reconnection of you with like the real you, your purpose, your mission in life, which is like kind of a big gift to connect to, instead of like, oh my God, now I'm never going to drink again, you know? So there is not the lack, but there's the abundance side to it.
Yes, exactly. And I tell clients all the time, because I don't work with people just in sobriety. I mostly work with people, like you said, who have habits that are holding them back. And this can look like you overuse social media. It can look like you said, any kind of sex, or maybe it's pornography, or it can even look like overeating. There are so many things that are not just alcohol that are holding us back from who we truly are. And we're using them as coping mechanisms that maybe it happened when we were younger. No one taught us how to share our feelings and feel our feelings. And we found a solution for the time being. I always say alcohol was not always a problem, it was my solution. It was the thing that helped me through a lot of moments that I couldn't physically handle, because I was a sensitive, well, am a sensitive soul. And I think that's what you're saying here is like, there's so many people who are so sensitive to things around them, and then they learn these coping mechanisms. And so for me, when it ended up being alcohol, it was like this ding, ding, ding moment of, oh my God, the thing that I thought I couldn't get rid of. I mean, I even told a health coach who was a trainer that I had after I had one of my babies one time, she was going over nutrition and diet with me. And I literally said to her, the one, I'll do whatever you say. I'll get rid of the unhealthy snacks, the processed foods. The one thing I won't give up is wine. And I said it so matter of factly, as if it was totally normal. Like every other mom on the planet had to have her glass of wine at the end of the day in order to cope and be with her kids. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, that one thing that I wouldn't give up no matter what was the thing all along. And you talked about this fork in the road, about how it really was my choice. And it was a path laid out by the universe where I could have continued to ignore it. Even today, I think I just went to Cabo on vacation last week for my kids' spring break. And I think to myself, I can still have a drink at any time. There's a bar up the street, there's a free margarita in Cabo. I can grab for that at any time. It's really this fork in the road where I choose to play the tape forward and say, how am I going to feel and how will my life play out if I use that substance to numb? And so it really is about taking this one bite at a time. And it truly is one day at a time. And it isn't just about alcohol. It's about that thing that's holding you back that you don't think you can give up no matter what, except it's usually the thing that is holding you back from everything waiting for you on the other side. And that's why, again, I'll just end with like, I love working with clients because a coach is there to keep them accountable. It's that week to week interaction of, this is what you say you want. I'm not telling you what you want. You have a vision for your life. I work with people on a vision 6 months out from today's date, right? So if you're telling me you want this in 6 months, but you're making this choice every day to have that, whether it's like an unhealthy snack every night and they want to lose 10 pounds. Okay, well, let's look at those choices. Let's go even deeper and look at the unconscious beliefs that are coming to the surface and trying to meet your consciousness. And I think that's what happened with me. I think I had these unconscious beliefs and they met with my consciousness, and I had this snap awakening moment. And if you're paying attention to it, the universe is always guiding you and it's always going to get you there. But how can you know if you don't take a break from that substance, from that thing that's holding you back? And that's what I encourage clients to do, is just, let's switch it up. You've been doing it this way for a long time. What's the harm in trying this for 8 weeks?
Yeah,
And
it makes
that was my early sobriety journey, right? Yeah,
yeah.
just taking that break and then making mistakes. I drank again and again. They would call it a relapse in AA, and that's what I did. And it takes some time to process and to learn. And I don't think enough people talk about that, because people think that you have to hit rock bottom and go to jail or get a DUI in order to stop. Or again, if it's other things, you hit a different rock bottom. But my podcast is really talking about, it's your choice. Like I have this saying where it's like, I didn't hit rock bottom. I chose to stop digging.
I've seen that, yeah, and it really spoke to me because I think it's like rephrased. Joe Dispenza talks about the same thing when he said like you don't have to go to like the worst case scenario until you like really connect to yourself. And like in his area of expertise, it's more of like the subconscious reprogramming or going into meditation and really into the awakening. But essentially, like it's the same thing again because we're coming back to ourselves. And I think what really is interesting is oh yeah, is that you talked about like the sensitivity that you mentioned it a few times, and I'm glad you did because I would love to touch on it. Because it's something that I found with my clients and myself that we all like kind of have in common when it comes to how to say that, to really like adapt for a long time to society and therefore like kind of unconsciously saying no to ourselves, because you mentioned it so beautifully. It's like everyone else did the same. And the way you described drinking, it was here, like I grew up in Germany, same thing. Everybody drank to exhaustion every weekend without questioning. And if you didn't, there was something wrong with you. And of course you
Yes.
think it's normal when you do that because everyone else does, which does not mean it's normal, but it's like how we adapt. And I think especially as empathic or like really sensitive humans, we have this very unconscious often, if you don't have parents or another way of like becoming aware of that early on, this like adapting mechanism of like not even having like the clear boundary between, oh, that's like what everyone else is feeling and that's what I am feeling, or this is what everyone else thinks it's right and that's what I think is right. So often these like are like really weaving into one another very closely. And so therefore I feel like we are more falling into being someone else or doing the habits of not our soul, but like the collective or the people we hang with. And then we don't even recognize it because it's what everyone around us does. So my first mentor always said, like, you are the product of the 5, I think, people that you're spending the most time with. And when I've heard it for the first time, I was like, no, I'm not a byproduct of like the people I'm spending most time with. But then again, we are, because it defines what is normal for us. And I feel especially with people who have like heightened sensitivity, or like feel a lot, maybe see a lot, are deep into their spiritual awakening, or have this like big programming around people pleasing or being the nice girl, which so many of us have, we fall easy for saying yes to something that isn't really ours to say yes to. And then that is not meaning that we can't come out of it, but it's meaning that we need to be like extra gentle with ourselves. And as you said, yeah, we could call it a relapse when you stop drinking and then you do it again. But do we always need to like end everything in this like harsh break? Sometimes like one of my mentors told me, like, if you want to release, she did it with another thing, but she said, like, you could release like this, or you could release like this, and then you drop it, and maybe you need to hold it because you look at it from a different angle. And I found that so beautiful. And it's essentially what you said with the quote unquote relapse is, you've tiptoed into it again, you looked at it again, you had your insights, I am so sure, and then you stopped it, and then maybe you picked it up for a while. Why do we need to beat ourselves up on this? Because I think, like, in hindsight, from everything you've said, it was meant to be in your journey, because that's the way you've learned, and that's the way like you deconditioned. And who are we to like question the like orchestration of the universe? It happens in this timeline exactly how it needed, but no, without being like the super dramatic point where you said like, this no more, because otherwise, I don't know, I would harm my kids, God forbid, or I would harm myself accidentally because of me not being conscious enough in that moment. So it doesn't have to be like that dramatic. I think it's enough drama to not holding ourselves accountable to what is really inside of us. That's absolutely enough to switch a habit.
Yes. And it's really about breaking the generational ties of something. Because what I'm hearing you say is that it is about this cycle that happens, not just for us and how we grew up and society that's around us, but how about our parents and their parents? And this was something passed on in my family line for a long time. And I like to say that my dad could never get it. He never stopped drinking, and he died an alcoholic. And this was just 2 years ago. I think that by stopping drinking and offering my parents a sober parent, if that's all I do on this earth and don't have the podcast, don't have the book, don't have anything, I've done my job here, because I didn't know what it was like to have a sober parent. And now I can show up for them. And I'm almost reparenting myself through watching them watch me. They learn by what I do, not by what I say. So I can tell them, alcohol's a little dangerous. Be careful. Don't drink and drive. Da, 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 da. But how about mommy doesn't go to dinner and have 2 glasses of wine and get in the car and drive? I don't have to tell you I did that. You saw me do that. How about the other night? I was in Cabo and I made a mocktail while they were passing out all the cocktails. And I put it down in front of me as my daughter and I were playing a game. And she said, Mommy, what's that? And I said, have a sip, because it was like a Shirley Temple. It didn't have alcohol. So these are gifts that I get to pass on to my kids. And then the second part of what you talked about is the sensitivity. And in my research, when I was going to, again, spiritual conferences, I was diving into books that I hadn't picked up in years. I had a whole self-help bookshelf that I never touched because I always picked alcohol over it. Yeah. And I was diving into all this stuff. And I also found a documentary called Sensitive, and it's a capital I in the middle, but it's just sensitive. And Alanis Morissette is in it, and she talks about how sensitive she was and is, and how sensitive her son was. And then the entire documentary dives into that some people, I think it's 1 in 4, are sensitive. And what this does is it makes us more prone to these addictive habits and tendencies, because we don't know how to deal with the sensitivity, as we talked about before. And I agree with you. It's like the universe and God and whatever you believe made you to create you, to bring you here, gives you this story for a reason. Well, I believe these sensitive souls are here for a reason, to share what I eventually learned and how I did stay sober was I have to share my emotions and my feelings, something I was never taught to do, something that I always brushed them all under the rug. And again, that first book talks a lot about that, about brushing all my feelings under the rug, pre-marriage, during marriage, like all of it. And then what ends up keeping me sober is I finally find the rooms of Al-Anon, which is, for family members and friends of alcoholics. So I was blaming everyone else. I was pointing a finger at everyone else. And I tried a 12-step program. And they taught me how to share my feelings, what it sounded like to hear other people share real feelings. I was just talking to a friend about how they don't say, like, how are you today? Oh, good. How are you? We show up and we say, how are you? How are you feeling? And you actually share like what you're feeling then, even if it's the deep, dark stuff. And that taught me that I need to get it out of me, or else if it sits inside of me, I want to pour alcohol over it. I want to numb it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, being a sensitive soul, I had no clue because I wasn't taught. And there are so many other things, they call them HSPs, but highly sensitive people. There's so many other things for highly sensitive people that, again, that I included in my life. So I was adding in all these tools of not only now a 12-step program and figuring that out, but then I'm watching documentaries, I'm reading books, I'm getting my own knowledge on the subject because, again, I was like, I'm not the alcoholic. Come to find out I am.
It's so
Come to find out it just looks different.
Yeah, it's like not the one size fits all description. And that was the first thing. I've worked for 2 years in like an addiction like hotline, talking to people who are or like family members of them. And it was one of the first thing that they've taught us during the education part of it was that like it has like 1,000 faces. And I was doing that because my boyfriend at the time was like a severe alcoholic and he quit after only a few months, and I was so in love and I couldn't handle it. So that was my way of coping with it, which I'm deeply grateful for because I've learned so much. And I've learned during that I'm kind of alcohol and cigarettes and drugs were never interesting to me, but I'm sugar addicted. And
Yeah.
the relapse thing is still going on to some extent. And I've never had that conscious before. So for me, that was an awakening too. It's like, that's another face of the addiction thing. So I was thinking like, okay, well, the other stuff is not interesting to me, kind of like having the attitude of, oh, that's something that I'm kind of just skipping, but then I wasn't. And I feel once we wrap our head around these different, it could be any addiction, like you said, social media or sex or sports or whatever, it doesn't even matter, but this like numbing ourselves to not feel ourselves or to not feel the feelings. I think like you said, 1 of 4 people is highly sensitive. That means 1 of 4 people has really difficulty in coping and making sense of all these experiences, all these feelings, all these sensations that come up every day in high intensity. And if we haven't parents that are highly sensitive as well, or that are well informed about this way of living life, about this way of feeling, then it's like, okay, well, don't make a drama out of it, and then they go on. And so like what do we learn? I've learned that emotions are kind of uncomfortable, they are not controllable, so I'll better not do it. I just numbed it and suppressed it for the most part of my life until I've realized I can actually deal with them and it's actually not that scary. Oh, I'm actually made for it. But that was a realization that took quite a lot of years, and I wish I had like parents and a family who were able to see that earlier. No blame, but like what you do with your kids to say like, okay, I am living role model how it is to live in a city where, or in a world where drinking is so much part of the daily normal. I'm not doing it. And that doesn't mean I have to be the weirdo, or it doesn't mean that I'm missing out on anything. I still have a lot of fun, or even more than before, but I'm just not doing that thing. You give them tools that I think we both, and so many other women that I know of, would have loved to have seen in their parents. And that is maybe the greatest gift that you can ever give to anyone, to like really live what you say, and then therefore they can pick it up without the pressure, without the shame, without the, if you don't do that, then I don't love you, or you're not part of the family, because it's like, you do you and I support you. And that's like the findings that I have. So there's an openness to having that much of a rich experience around a topic.
Yes, exactly. And I do feel that it's not only showing them that I don't drink, it's showing them what I show up and do in the world. So, I wake up and I journal, and my son woke up early today and he saw me journaling. Okay, I hope one day if he's having a hard time, he knows that he can pick up his journal. Or the other day, I'm meditating and I sit in front of a red light and I meditate. And my daughter drew a picture and handed it to me. And it was three scenarios. One was a calm lake, the other one was the red light meditation. And then there was yoga, I think. And she made this little movable character where it could jump from each place on the piece of paper, and she brought it to me and I asked her what it was, and she's explaining, "Mommy, you put the little movable character however you're feeling that day." And I was like, "Oh my gosh. If I were drinking, she never would have she would have seen me on the couch at night with a bottle of wine and in my bed in the morning never meditating." And
Mm-hmm.
instead, she's learning these tools of, what do you need to regulate your emotions? Well, maybe you need to go outside in nature to a calm lake. Maybe you should sit in front of a red light and meditate. Like, these are things I was not doing when I was drinking. And even going to hot yoga and drinking my green juice. Sure, I was doing those things and getting away with it. But so much of a deeper level, I do breath work with my kids if they're feeling any kind of anxiety, or again, I will sit and I'll pray and I'll meditate with them. And it's just such a beautiful thing to pass on, that whether they are highly sensitive or not, there's such better tools than, let me just show you mommy pouring a glass of wine. And I need this because you're not behaving. I
Mm-hmm.
need this because you're annoying, or this is bothering me. Now it's like, I mean, it's almost to that conscious parenting where you're like, well, how are you feeling? What's underneath the anger if they're having some kind of outburst? It's like, underneath the anger is usually sadness. So is there something going on that you want to talk about? So again, these little like things that are just these small choices I'm making are making big shifts for my children and their future.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. And you just described the richness of tools that you're showing them in every day. A little bit different. Someday you need the red light, someday you need the nature, someday you need journaling, and that's enough. You tell them through your example so many different ways, because not every day is the same, because we're always experiencing different things, going to different things, having different awarenesses. And it's not just a one fits all solution of, let me pour a glass of wine or smoke a cigarette or do whatever we do or did, to say like, okay, well, then that's how I relax. But you make the effort, find the best possible, I don't want to even say solution, but the best possible tool for that moment. And that's what they see. And so they later on, I do that with my son too. If he's angry, then we work through it and we like punch the couch, which I've never been able to do as a kid, because it was like, okay, she will at some point, calm down eventually. But I think it's just different when they observe, they like soak everything in, and they observe that there are different ways of doing different things, and we can all make mistakes, and they see the vulnerability and the openness to work on yourself. And for me, what I've always circling back to is how beautiful, because this new generation, with which tools they are growing up, like what an amazing society will that be when so many of these kids, maybe potentially all of them at some point, have these tools at hand. How different would our collective look if we would regulate ourselves like this, if we would talk about our feelings like this, if we would not numb ourselves, our bodies, or every sense with some substance, but instead we would kind of stay open. That's a whole different world we're creating, just quote unquote by stopping a habit or saying no to an addiction and yes to commitment. You've touched on that before, and I think it's a beautiful way to kind of wrap up this session, is like the life coaching that you now found your way into, which is like so fitting because of all the women that I'm thinking of who have their own, unhealthy habits or addictions. And what we most need is the space to talk about that openly and the commitment, because often we haven't learned to like really commit to ourselves. So if I say I stop eating sugar this week, and in a few weeks I start again, I'm kind of falling back and I kind of like betray myself, at least like emotionally. But if you have someone who is there and who is not beating you up, but who's saying, where do you want to go? What is your like big vision? How can I get you there? Here's a helping hand. And it's without judgment, but it's with the integrity of someone who has walked through it. I think that's the most powerful thing we can give each other to kind of collectively move forward in a way that is gentle and that is not rooted in harshness or you are excluded if you don't, or whatever other unconscious threat we could think of.
Yes, it's all like that story about there's like a parable about someone at the bottom of a well and someone walks by, and instead of throwing them a ladder and letting them just climb out, the person walks by and they jump down and they go to the bottom with the other person and they say, "What are you doing? Why would you do this?" And it's like, well, we're going to figure it out together. We're going to get out of here together. And that's what it means to me to be a life coach, is that accountability. It's like, I'm going to come down. I'm going to find out where you're at, what got you to the low depths, but then let's get out of here together. You know, and have all the answers within you. I'm there to give you a safe space to pull them out and to figure out what is holding you back. You might not even know, right? We talked about that subconscious mindset of, I don't even know the thing holding me back, but here I am. And again, my coaching program is so interesting because you go through week by week, not just your vision, but you talk about your beliefs and you go into a deep dive there. You talk about your self-worth, you talk about your confidence, all of these things week by week to give tools. Again, what I wish I had when I was trying to figure out how to remove alcohol. Because for me, it was like, I worked through a 12-step program. I started in Al-Anon. I did eventually end up in AA. And AA is the thing where it's like those first 3 steps, admitting you're powerless. Okay, I heard in those rooms, you're not just admitting you're powerless over this substance, you're actually saying, I'm powerful because I can give it up if I choose to. And those were the stigmas that were holding me back. It was like, well, I'm not powerless over it. I can choose it or not choose it or do what I want to do. And through my journey and the process of having mentors along the way, I had a therapist, I had a sponsor, and these people, which again is part of the reason I became a life coach, are the people that helped me see, you're just a little further ahead than I am. How can you help me get there? And so again, I love what you're saying. And again, how we're passing it on to our younger generations as well. But there's so many people out there where they don't realize that these things are holding them back. And again, that was my why when I started the podcast, was I wanted to be the woman that I wish I saw when I was trying to give up my habits.
Yeah, I think we really have that in common. This like what I wish I knew earlier, or like even having the glimpse of, oh, that's like another way to look at it, or that's like another way to try not cope with it, but to try to like move around it and learn about it. And I think it's beautiful that we spread it out into the world and it kind of ripples into the clients,
Yeah.
the applicants, but then their families and then their families. And so like it's just, for me, it's a really beautiful picture to see what we can do with the intention of being there for another. And like you said, figuring it out together, because that's meaning so much more than it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for this, for your openness, for your inspiration, for being so vulnerable. I really appreciate it. And my listeners will too, I am so sure. It's just like, it's really beautiful to not hold back, because that's like the power of the story is always something that I, for myself, like I can so easily recall a story like you've told, because it like deeply ingrains into the soul. And so therefore I thank you so much for being here and for doing what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And that is the best way to learn is through other people's stories because it is for some reason what clicks. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Oh, that was really, really beautiful.